Hi YouTube. I've been looking around and on YouTube and elsewhere there's many videos about how to get faster at the Rubik's Cube, and they all generally say the same thing. You know, lubricate it with silicone or Vaseline for some other videos, but generally, you know, lubricate it, get a faster cube, maybe do finger tricks, and just stuff like that. Although those are really useful, they're really generic tips. So I decided to make my own explanation of how to get faster at the Rubik's Cube. And it's a two-part series, so this part is the first part, and it's going to cover hardware, and the second video will cover technique. So hardware is basically anything you can buy, and technique is anything you can do to practice and improve your actual solving speed on any given cube. So let's get started. So the first thing is the type of cube you own. Right here I have a Dian Guhong, but it's really it's kind of hard to control actually. And so I wouldn't recommend this cube for anybody. It really depends on who you are. If you're averaging 40 seconds, then maybe this isn't the cube for you, because quite honestly, I didn't get my first DIY until I was around 30 seconds. So at 40 seconds, I mean, really, you can do fine with just a store-bought. Just make sure you practice, and you'll get faster. I mean, if you want to get really fast with a better cube, so sort of this instantaneous time boost instead of practicing, then yeah, go for a DIY. But again, I wouldn't go for something like the Guhong, because this cube is just ridiculously hard to control, and you're probably better off with a regular DIY, like a Cube for You DIY, or maybe Type A5. The clickiness actually helps a lot with turning accuracy, and since this is smooth, it's actually pretty hard to judge when you've turned an actual layer. If you're around 30 seconds, I suggest generally the same thing, maybe a Rubix.com DIY, or something of the sort. And obviously, if you're a little bit more advanced, 25 seconds, looking for sub 20, then maybe a Guhong Lingyun or F2. But again, you have to take all of my advice with a grain of salt, because it really does depend on your style. I mean, if you're a very fast turner, then, you know, Guhong's great for you. But on the other hand, if you want a lot of control, then, you know, you can't really use the Guhong, because it doesn't really lend well to control. I mean, obviously, after practice, you can get pretty good at it, but yeah, just take my advice with a grain of salt. The next thing I would say is lubricants, and there's a lot of different kinds of lubricants out there, but you kind of just have to kind of judge for yourself what you want to use, depending on cost. So the most obvious one is silicone, and it's a really great lubricant, works pretty much for everything. I use silicone spray with this Guhong, and it works well. The second one is Maru Lube. With my experience, Maru Lube is really good, and it actually lasts quite a long time. Of course, I usually use it only with Maru cubes, which means that, I mean, that's what it was made for, so it lasts quite a bit longer. But it does tend to wear off a bit faster on other types of cubes, so you might want to keep that in mind. And the other thing is Maru Lube is actually quite expensive in comparison to silicone spray. Vaseline is a terrible lubricant. Don't use it. It really is bad. If you have a store-bought, so this is like the one exception, if you have a store-bought and it's really tight, go ahead and use Vaseline, because it'll corrode away the plastic, and then what you can actually do is wash off the plastic after about a month and lube it with silicone spray, and it should be really good, or at least a lot better. So that's kind of my advice with Vaseline. And there's also this new type of lubricant called Cyoubx cube, which is pure silicone, and it's apparently really good. I've never actually tried it, so again, take my advice with a grain of salt, but it's apparently really good, and it should be, because it's 100% pure silicone. But it is really expensive. So overall, I would say go with silicone spray, just because the availability is just so great. I mean, you can get it at like any hardware store, and you don't have to order it online, and it lasts a long time. It works well, and it's relatively cheap. The other lubricant would be shock oil. Generally, people use something around 30 weight, and it is good, and it's actually a lot like Rubik's Cube, but again, it's not as widely available, and it also gives it a different feel. It gives it gives the cube a gummy feel, which some people like, but others don't like that. I personally do, but I don't have any shock oil here with me, so I personally recommend silicone spray. But of course, Maru Lube, Cyoubx, shock oil, all of that is really, really good. So, in general, when you pick your cube, I mean, the cube hardware isn't as important as people think. Lubrication is actually really just important because of the feel of the cube and general speed of it, but in the end, if you want to get faster, it's going to have to be practice, really. You just can't get faster just by buying a better cube. It doesn't work that way. You have to work towards something in order to get faster. So part 2 is actually more important because that's going to be telling you what you can do to actually get faster versus sort of things you can do with money in order to get faster. And the last thing I'll say is, again, the cube, I mean, it really depends on your style. You know, something that's clicky is generally pretty easy to control, and it's pretty good for beginners who want to DIY. Things like the Guhang, I mean, it's so smooth that it's actually relatively difficult to control, and so unless you're like really, really fast or trying to get really fast, then it's not really for you, especially if you're at 40 seconds. This will be of no use to you. And I'll explain it a little bit more in my how to practice video, but generally speaking, if you're wristing all your turns, then this is a complete waste because 1, it's kind of expensive, and 2, I mean, you can do the same with the store-bought, really. I mean, it might be easier to turn, but generally speaking, if you're going to wrist everything, a store-bought will do just fine. So, definitely depends on your style and your speed. And again, take my advice with a grain of salt. So, until the next video, which I think you should watch, annotation will be right, let's pick a good spot. Okay, how about right there, that's part 2. So thanks for watching, and go to part 2. See ya.